to Design Matters TV. Now I've got a project for you today to help decorate your house for the winter season, and we're going to use a really fast method of spray painting and then also a little bit of quilting and some fabric painting. I think you're going to really like how it comes together at the end. Now you're going to need some pieces of fabric. We're going to make a table runner, although to be honest you could adapt this to make something smaller, so a little table centre mat perhaps if you have less time, but I'm going to go for a table runner. So I've cut myself some long strips of fabric. So if you're making this for yourself, have a look at your table and think about the proportion, the length of your table, and cut yourself a rectangle that suits it. Now you might want to keep it quite narrow like I have, so that there's still space either side of the centre runner to put your placemats when you actually sit down and eat. So proportion is entirely up to you, but because of my table I've ended up with this very long skinny strip. It's about 10 inches wide by about that long, don't ask me. You can see I'm using hand-dyed fabrics because I've done a lot of hand dyeing lately and I really want to make use of them, but you could use a commercial solid coloured cotton as well if you wanted to. I think the hand dye makes it look all more painterly and more interesting. Now you're going to need two different colours because our runner or mat is going to be reversible. So for the front, the side that we're going to tackle first, you need to use a light to medium value to ensure that your spray painting is going to show. And then for the other side of the runner, choose something that's quite different. So choose something that's a completely different colour, and if you want to you can go quite dark with this because the technique we're going to use on that side, it won't matter if it's a really dark colour. So you can see I've gone for nice warm tones on one side and then these nice cool amethysty jewel tones on the other. I think the point of making something that is reversible is that it'll give you a completely different look when you flip it over. So there's little point in using the same fabric top and bottom. Go for something that's quite different. Now this one we can just set aside for later. We're going to just concern ourselves with this top fabric today, and we're going to use freezer paper to make some snowflake templates because I thought that would look really lovely and wintry. So I've already got some cut out here. So freezer paper, I'm sure you're all familiar with that. You can get it in, well in the UK you can get it in quilt shops. In North America you can get it in the supermarket fairly inexpensively. And it's a paper that has a waxy side on one side and just normal papery side on the other. And when you heat it with an iron, when you iron it down, the waxy side sticks to the fabric and makes an excellent mask in this case. So you can see I've already cut some paper snowflakes, and I'm sure you must have all done this when you were children. And you know, on those lines, if you happen to have some children hanging around the house these holidays, then get them involved in this stage and they could actually cut your snowflakes for you. But here I've got a little piece of freezer paper and I've just folded it to make it roughly a square shape, and then I fold it in again and again. So I think that's 8 if anybody's counting. Just crease those down, try and be a bit neat. And if you want your snowflake to have a mostly rounded shape, then at this point you can just cut off that bit there and that scrap. And then all you have to do is cut into it. Little heart shapes I always think look quite nice, and you just do those by cutting in and then back down onto your crease, and that little shape obviously when you open it up makes a little heart, and that looks quite nice if you think this is going on your table and you want something welcoming. So basically you just take some nice sharp scissors, cut through all of your layers at once. But if you've got children, they're going to love doing this stage, and you can have them cutting out loads of snowflakes, and then you can just choose the one that you think is going to work nicely. You cut it away as much as you want, and when you're happy with your design, open it up and you'll have some snowflakes like these. Now I've made mine at different sizes. I think that makes for a more interesting design. And can you also see that I've cut them bigger than my width of the fabric? So I'm only going to get partial snowflakes in some areas, and again I think that's more interesting. Slightly creates this sort of abstract look, which I really like. So the next stage, once you've cut a few snowflakes, different sized ones, start to place them and position them onto your fabric until you get something that you are happy with the arrangement of. Now you can place them quite close together, or you can place them a little further apart. It's entirely up to you what you want to go for. But when you're happy with it, make sure that they are waxy side down onto your fabric, and then with an iron that suits your fabric. So we're using cotton fabric today, so iron on a cotton setting and just carefully press them down. Obviously you don't want to be doing too much movement with the iron because you're just going to get it caught on the little cut shapes. So obviously don't move your iron back and forth too much, just press, because you don't want it to get caught on the little delicate paper shapes and tear them. But make sure it's well pressed down, you've got good contact everywhere, so that the paint, when we use it, isn't going to sneak underneath. Now where you've got a bit hanging over the edge here, you can just trim that bit off with scissors, and then this little offcut, why not position that down here on the edge there, and you're not wasting then any of the paper that you've cut. So just keep positioning and ironing until you've got the whole of the length of your table runner with your masks, your freezer paper masks in place, and then you're ready for the next stage. So once your shapes are all ironed onto your fabric, you can do the spraying. And we're going to use fabric paint in spray bottles. Now you can get this from craft shops, you can get it online. The brand that I'm using is Tulip, and that's pretty widely available. So these come in a little pump spray bottle, and you spray them on. Once they're dry, you just heat fix them, so they're really easy to use. I'm going to use a selection of different colours today. I'm keeping this side of the table runner all to the warm tones, so I've picked out reds, pinks and a gold, and I'm going to build them up in layers so I can kind of increase the depth of colour quite gradually. What I find with these, if I just begin to work, is some of them spray a lot better than others. Some of them you get a little bit of a squirt rather than a nice even mist. Now you can improve the sort of quality of your spraying by working on a vertical surface and standing back a little bit. That will give you a finer mist. To be honest, I don't mind the sort of spatter approach because I think it gives you a bit more visual texture. So it just sort of depends on the look that you're going for. But build it up gradually. You can see I've just put some scrap paper underneath my work here, because obviously there's going to be some overspray. So it might be an opportunity you could, if it's not, you know, too freezing cold or windy, you can work outside. Otherwise just protect your working area to make sure you don't spoil anything, because the spray can travel surprisingly far and you don't want to get it on anything precious, obviously. Look at this one, this is much more of a spatter jet. Now can you see I did cover quite a lot of my fabric with the snowflake templates, because the next stage, once this is sprayed and heat set, is we're going to layer up and we're going to quilt. And if you leave too many blank areas, you're not going to have anything very interesting to quilt. Whereas, you know, if you put lots of snowflakes down, the more snowflakes, the more pattern, the more interesting it's going to be, the more decorative it's going to be. So you can work across the entire length of your runner, just building up the spray paint. I build it up gradually so it's not going to get too soaking wet. And you might want to vary the colour as you spray. So you could spray one area that's much redder and then keep gold to one end and gold to the other, and, you know, play with the layering of the colour in that way. And you can see as you're spraying, you know, if you think, oh, I need a little bit more in that area, put a little bit more on. You'll surprise yourself once it's dry and you peel the snowflakes back, there's probably going to be more colour there than you think there is at this stage. So if you're a little bit nervous about using spray paints, perhaps you haven't used them before, all I would recommend is that you just follow the instructions on the packaging, whatever, because you might be using a different brand of spray paint to me. So look at what it says on the packaging. You know, if it says you need to be wearing a mask, obviously wear one and wear protective clothing if required. So just follow the manufacturer's guidelines, because they'll tell you all that you need to know. And often if you look on their websites as well, there'll be more information on their websites. But you can see I'm just gradually working down the length of the runner. Now if yours is quite long like mine, you can just keep sliding it down the table till you get to the next section, and then build up a little bit. And I would say don't be tempted to peel off your snowflakes until your fabric paint is completely dry, because they'll be a bit hard to handle and you don't want to smudge your spraying. So be patient, do the spraying, perhaps go off and do something else, and in a couple of hours, or leave it overnight to be sure, and then come back and it'll be completely dry and have the fun stage of peeling and revealing your design. So I'm going to finish off the spraying and I'll see you back here when it's all dry. Okay, so I've waited as long as I can stand it, and it's almost dry. Now I get to do the fun bit where I can actually peel away the freezer paper to reveal the design underneath. So just find yourself a little edge and then just carefully peel back that freezer paper, and you should see your pretty snowflakes revealed in all their glory. Now these can be quite delicate, these paper shapes. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to use them again, to be honest, so don't worry if they tear. There you go. And just move that along. Let's get this bigger one off here. Now once you've peeled off all of the freezer paper masks, you just need to heat set it probably, and just again refer to your manufacturer's instructions for the fabric paints that you're using. Mine are heat set, so I'm just going to use a nice hot iron that's suitable for my fabric, so cotton setting, and I'm just going to heat set that to make sure it's all completely fixed. So just take your time, except if it's a long piece you need to make sure that you iron and press all of it completely to make sure that your fabric paints are really set. And then we can get on with the next stage, which is going to be the quilting. I'll see you back here soon. So when you're done with your spraying and it's all dry and you've heat fixed it, or whatever is appropriate for the spray paints that you've used, it's time to move on to the next stage, which is actually putting together your table runner and creating this idea of it being reversible. And the way that we're going to do that is by using quilting. Now obviously we've just sprayed one piece of fabric at this stage, but if you layer it up with wadding and an interesting backing fabric that's, use a different colour, use something really bright and different to the top fabric, then what we can do is we can use quilting to get that design transferred to both sides. So if you have a look at mine, you can see that I've already done the quilting on this piece here, and I layered up with just, actually it's a soya wadding, but you could use any kind of thin cotton wadding, poly cotton wadding, anything that you happen to have is going to work fine. And I've laid mine onto this bright turquoisey purpley backing fabric, so you can see I've got quite a different colour on the other side. I can't say back really because it's reversible, there isn't a back anymore, because I want it to look quite different when I flip it over when it's in use. And all that I've done with the quilting is I've gone around all of the stenciled shapes, just working freehand. So don't get worried about how perfect this is. Mine isn't perfect. Sometimes it's actually quite hard to see where the edges were if the spraying didn't have very much definition. Other times it's really obvious. I just tried to sort of stay fairly true to the sprayed shapes and just travelled around. Now, there's a couple of things to think about when you're doing this. Number one, most important thing, is the choice of colour of thread, because you want that to really contribute to your design, and you need a colour of thread that's going to work on the front, we'll say the front, and the back. Now I decided to use the same thread top and bottom on my machine because I just felt that that would be easier to help balance the tension, that sort of thing. So I've gone with a hot pink, which I felt worked, it complemented both fabrics, so it stands out quite well on this warm tones, and it also works, I think, pretty well on the cool side as well. You could decide to have a different thread colour top and bottom, just to see what works for your project and the colour scheme that you've got going on. The other thing that's important to think about is to just do a little test swatch, a little test sandwich of your quilting before you embark on your main project, because you do need to make sure that your quilting, the tension of your quilting is perfect. You don't want anything horrible happening on the back, because then it means when you want to use this side of your runner, it's not going to be very beautiful, and you want the quilting to be as nice on both sides. If you don't fancy doing the machine quilting, obviously there'll be nothing to stop you hand quilting this. It will just take a little bit longer than the machine quilting. Now if you look at the design here, you can see that there is something to consider when you're doing freehand quilting, and that is that when I usually like to free motion quilt, I like to start somewhere and do as much as I can and finish over here without any starts and stops, and that is impossible with this because there are so many island shapes. I decided that life is far too short to worry about ends, so all I've done is when I've started an island shape, say this heart here, I've just done a few stitches on the spot here, gone round my shape, a few more stitches on the spot, and then I've jumped to the next island and repeated that. So I had lots of jump stitches between all of these shapes. I just used small scissors and just snipped those off, and I think that looks pretty neat, and you know, the stitching is secure and that's going to work fine. So proceed with doing your free motion quilting until you've outlined all of your stenciled snowflake shapes, and then you're onto the fun finishing stage, which is to make the other side just as interesting as this one. This one's obviously lovely because you've got all of the spray texture from the spraying and the stenciling, but on this side, when you flip it over, at the moment here you can see it's just the quilting, and while it's quite a pretty pattern, I wanted to emphasize it more, so I've used fabric painting to do that for me, and you can see here how that has really transformed the quilting. You can pick out as much as you want with the fabric painting. You can decide whether you want to paint the background or the motif. Now if you flip back, obviously with the spraying we were masking out the snowflake and spraying the background, so I've gone for the counter change of that on here, and I've painted the motif instead, and I'm just using a fabric paint for that. So this is a Jacquard Lumiere, a metallic paint, and I've actually popped a little bit of paint into the lid of the paint pot here, and I've added a bit of water. I found that I needed to make the paint fairly fluid here to paint nicely. You want it to be an enjoyable process, so I've added a little bit of water there just to help the flow. You need to judge that based on your paints. You obviously don't want the paint to be so runny that it's going to bleed as you paint, because that will really spoil the look of your project. Now if I slide the work over here, you can see I've got a section here where I've just stopped finished painting here. I just need to complete this shape. So I take some of the paint on this brush, and I find where I've got a fairly large area that I need to paint, and I start in the centre of that, and then I gradually work towards the stitch line. I try not to paint over the thread. You know, when you've quilted a motif, it creates that little cushioned area. So the thread is in a ditch, in a valley, and then this, you can see here how this sort of sticks up. It's padded, you know, it's quilted now. So what we want to do is just paint that cushioned area, leaving, you know, just a hair's breadth from the thread really. You can go fairly close. The reason you want to do that is for neatness. It looks a lot neater to just paint close to the quilting rather than painting right up to it. And also for technical reasons, if you were to paint over your thread, then there'd be quite a high chance that this paint could leach through the stitching and make an appearance on the other side, and that would really spoil the other side. So we want to avoid that happening, so just stay away from your stitching. Now can you see the brush that I'm using today? I found that I really enjoy doing this fabric painting with this brush, which is a filbert. Now if you do painting, you will be familiar with a filbert, but if not, then perhaps you've not used this brush before. You can see it's got a lovely oval shape to it, so it has a broad side, but also if you flip it over you can see it's quite narrow on its edge, and I found for these snowflake shapes that was ideal, because where you've got a broad area to paint, you can use the broad side of the brush and apply quite a bit of paint quite quickly. And then say you've got a narrow channel you need to pass through, just tip that brush up and round and use the thin side of the brush and you can scoot through that narrow shape and into little points really quite effectively there. Now I'm just using a single colour of fabric paint here, this silver, which is, as you can see, a very opaque paint that covers very well even these darker fabrics here. And I'm thinking about the contrast and making sure that my snowflakes are going to show really quite well. What has sort of struck me here is if I just slide this down, can you see here there's a much paler area in these are hand-dyed fabrics, so there's a much paler area here, and obviously this silvery colour of paint isn't going to show so much on this area of fabric as it does on the dark purple sections. So I can decide whether that's a good thing and whether I just want this to be a bit more low-key, or whether I want to bring in another colour of fabric paint. I could perhaps bring in a purple mixed in with this silver, so I have a metallic purple, and that could look quite effective in this area as well. So as I'm painting, I'm sort of thinking about these options, and I'll decide when I get to this section what I'm going to go for. Now these Jacquard Lumiere paints, these are heat set paint. So you let them to dry and then just heat set them with the heat of an iron. Just follow the instructions with whatever fabric paints that you're using. And then the final stage is just to pop on a binding, and you can see I've gone here for a multicoloured binding. Again, because we're working with a double-sided project, we need a binding that's going to work for both sides, so the cool and the warm side. And you can see in this binding here, I've got nice splashes of warm oranges and pinky reds, but also the lovely blue greys as well. So I think that that works quite effectively when you're seeing it from either side. So I hope you enjoy giving this double-sided winter table runner project a go, and that you'll enjoy brushing up on your free motion skills, your spraying and your fabric painting. Thanks for watching today, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.